Within schools, many social factors are present, and with these come many issues. These issues that students face day to day in schools can be linked with broader societal issues. This video will include narratives which will help to illustrate these broad societal issues within the community. It will also explore aspects of gender stereotyping, race, ethnicity and culture, as well as Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander issues within schools. Firstly, I will begin by explaining my narrative on gender. My story begins in the 3rd grade at my primary school. I began my first day and I made friends with a girl in my class. We discussed playing together at lunchtime, and she was going to show me around the school. Just before the lunch bell rang, my teacher pulled me aside to tell me that I should make friends with the other boys in the class instead, as I will fit in better with them. She was reinforcing my gender identity. She arranged for one of the boys in the class to show me around. Once lunchtime began, I followed this boy out onto the playground. He went up to the sports shed and retrieved a soccer ball. This was the first time I had ever experienced playing soccer. He kicked the ball to me and I tried to kick it back, however I missed the ball and fell over. He laughed at me and could not understand why I was unable to kick a ball. He had been taught to kick and throw from a young age by his dad. However, I was from a single parent family and I never saw my dad. My mother had taught me other things in life that I enjoyed, and the concept of playing any types of sports was entirely new to me. The boys then took me to the other side of the oval, where they began to step on bugs and laugh. This really shocked me. My mother had taught me from a young age to be a caring, respectful individual. When I was young, she taught me to respect animals and plants. She taught me that even the smallest ant in this world has value. I remember returning to class after lunch quite visibly upset due to being teased by this boy and his friends for my lack of sporting ability, and I was upset from what I had just seen them do. The teacher noticed that I was crying and came over to me. She made it very clear to me that I am a boy and boys are tough and they are not supposed to cry. This again reinforced my gender identity by describing the characteristics and traits that are considered to be appropriate to males. This was my first taste of gender stereotyping that I had experienced firsthand. Being 2018 now, I would have thought this wouldn't happen. However, this year I volunteered at a primary school, and to my surprise and devastation, I have seen firsthand a very similar story. The teacher who I was helping was calling out to a male student. She was making it very clear to him that as a boy he needs to participate in sports like the other boys. This made me quite upset, and I informed her of how hurtful her words can be. She didn't seem bothered by this, and I now realise that gender stereotyping remains a clear problem in our schools. This issue can also be linked with Arun's story.
Going to an international high school is as good as it gets for an international student who, like all high school students, just wants to fit in. Although my high school provided me with the confidence of being just like everybody else in one regard, an unexpected issue that existed within the school was gender discrimination. My narrative will provide multiple examples of gender discrimination and role assumptions I had observed during my high school years. In addition, their relation to the Australian standards and the hidden curriculum will also be discussed. Gender role assumptions, which can be defined as the way we are expected to act, speak, dress, groom, and conduct ourselves based upon our assigned sex, was a problem that clearly existed during my time at high school. My first example of this issue takes place in my Year 10 Humanities class. My teacher had let girls use the bathroom during class without question, however denied boys this very same request. I inquired as to why boys couldn't use the toilet but girls could, and was told that girls' bodies are different from boys, and it might be their period giving them trouble. My first example illustrates an inequality of gender rights due to an assumption and discrimination in gender roles. My teacher had created a rule that allowed girls the freedom to use the toilet but disallowed boys solely based on gender alone. My second example revolves around gender assumption in sports. GISA gave students the chance to represent their school against other schools in a range of different sports. GISA football and netball were both advertised on the same day in the morning bulletin, but with a very limiting headline above both. Football was addressed to boys and netball was addressed to girls, despite having both genders participating in the weekly football and netball afternoon sport. Once again, this illustrates an inequality of gender rights due to an assumption and discrimination in gender roles. Based on your gender as opposed to your preference, you were given the opportunity to represent your school in the designated sport. My third example looks at gender assumption and appearance. At the start of the school study planner is a list of rules and regulations set down by the school, including uniform reminders. Written under this title as a rule is girls only may wear one set of plain gold or silver studs. This illustrates yet another gender-specific rule that allows girls the opportunity to wear earrings but denies boys this opportunity. Sex is a biological fact, being male or female. By contrast, gender is a cultural and social phenomenon that refers to constructed differences between men and women. Social constructs, which are ideas that have been created and accepted by the people in a society, ultimately dictates the way in which we live and decide what is acceptable and unacceptable. All three of these experiences illustrate a social construct being taught via the hidden curriculum, which refers to the unwritten, unofficial, and often unintended lessons, values, and perspectives that students learn in school. This includes how they should interact with peers, as well as how they perceive different races, groups, or classes of people, or what ideas and behaviours are considered acceptable or unacceptable. Just like any high school student who is simply there to absorb and learn, the exposure to this gender discrimination can create dire implications to the attitudes of any students that learns these socially adopted rules and regulations. Students are supposed to learn from their teachers, and so it is the responsibility of the teachers to eliminate a curriculum that is infected with any socially constructed discrimination. The Melbourne Declaration for Educational Goal 1.1 is Australian schooling promotes equity and excellence. It is a requirement to provide all students with access to high quality schooling that is free from discrimination based on gender. Therefore, it can be stated that schools and teachers must free themselves from the social construct of gender roles and assumptions to effectively promote equity in the school sector. Gender discrimination and gender role assumptions clearly exist as an issue during high school, and to be corrected, teachers must eradicate this view from their teachings. Next, Keegan will discuss his narrative regarding race, ethnicity, and culture.
My first experience with race, ethnicity and culture begins in grade 1. In my class, there was a girl named Kelly who was from Sri Lanka. Kelly couldn't speak English very well, and because of this, she struggled socially and academically. Kelly received very little assistance from staff, and the fact that she couldn't speak English very well led to her being on the outer. A way of looking at this situation includes the multicultural teacher introspection. Nitsa M. Hidalgo contends that children of colour were implicitly judged deficient because they did not bring to school the same majority culture represented in school or classrooms. That teachers learn mainstream or whiteness to be the norm. The one-size-fits-all approach was not applicable for someone with a background entirely different to the rest of the cohort. This lack of understanding is also reflected in education change in society, where it is stated that there was far more bilingual education in Australia in the 19th century than at present, and that Australia is treating languages at best as a luxury and not a necessity. In these situations, Kelly's socio-cultural identity, where English was not dominant linguistically, negatively affected her learning. This situation can be directly contrasted to my experience in Year 11. Two boys from the Northern Territory, Matthew and James, came down and were in my Year 11 class. Like Kelly, they didn't speak English well. However, they were provided assistance in the form of a teacher's aide. They did struggle academically, but they were able to overcome these obstacles due to the extra help that they received. The school also celebrated their differences, regularly putting on Indigenous celebrations at school assemblies. They were truly embraced by the school. My experience with Matthew and James details a good example of intercultural understanding. As part of the Australian curriculum, intercultural understanding encourages students to make connections between their own worlds and the worlds of others, to build interests and commonalities, and to negotiate or mediate difference. From a socio-cultural identity standpoint, as there was a large emphasis on allowing a deep intercultural understanding, Matthew and James were able to get the most out of their education and their time at the school, through an expression of their culture and subsequently a celebration of it. Similarly, this allowed students to gain a deeper and more thoughtful understanding of a culture different to their own.
As defined by Haynes, 2013, page 7, the notion of sociological imagination enables is to our place experience into a meaningful context based on the historical and social context they are derived from. This narrative aims to look back at my time during school, where I was fortunate enough to be included in a social justice trip. As I heard about it during the daily school's newsletter, that instead of going on the year level camp, would go up to the Northern Territory and be social justice advocates, raising awareness and respecting the Indigenous culture whilst up there. I thought this would be a great chance, as the only real interaction I had with the Indigenous culture was a school trip to the Narana Indigenous Centre on the Torquay Highway, and playing football with some Indigenous boys. After going through the process of being interviewed, and what I would hope to gain out of the experience, after a week waiting, I discovered that I had been accepted. When the time came, all the students boarded the plane and headed up to the Darwin airport. Once we finally arrived on the island, it was really an eye-opener, as it was if we had arrived on the island during the 1970s, as the island didn't have any resources that we are often assumed with, such as having a hospital or having a bank. This was a moment in which, at first, I felt quite alienated, as for once, I was the minority for the first time in my life. As the week progressed, we developed relationships that would last a lifetime with these kids, and I'm sure the kids wouldn't forget us anytime soon. I got to teach the kids some sport, which was great, as doing this unwillingly led to me becoming a teacher. Getting to teach the kids some sports and games was quite fulfilling, as not only I was getting fulfillment by setting up these activities, but also the kids really enjoyed it, as often when the day had finished, they wanted to keep on going. Teaching in 35 degrees weather was quite draining when sitting in a classroom and observing the kids learn. There was quite a range of inequality from kids not having the resources such as pens and paper, to kids being picked up by the school bus and getting driven to school. There were some kids that wouldn't even want to go to school, so often some of the teachers on the school bus would have to go and get the kids ready for school. And if this didn't happen, simply the kids wouldn't come to school. A lot of the kids would arrive at the school hungry, so to tackle this issue, the school would provide breakfast for the kids who were less fortunate and would provide breakfast options such as cereal or toast. On the other side of the spectrum, some kids had all the resources, had a freshly ironed school uniform, and were always the first to arrive at school and be ready for the day ahead. This relates back to the first weekly reading by Bagnall, Connell, Vickers and Welch from 2013 on page 3, as there are a wide range of students from different backgrounds all going to school and being taught all the same, regardless of their background.